when we left off, we kind of went through a little bit of an example, and we'll bring up our GUI in just a second. Let's take a minute. We'll get back into some code in just a second. Let's take a minute and look at some components. Okay, so you guys can kind of guess, but just to kind of give you a very quick overview of just a few of the components that you have as an option, we have what's called a label. Okay, so a label basically is something that just displays text. Okay, so over to the right side, I basically have some examples of each of these. So you can see here, it's just kind of like, it doesn't look like it's surrounded by a border or anything like that. Usually it's just black text, right, if we don't do anything else. So this is a label. The official class that we use from our Swing library is JLabel. Okay, so remember, everything starts with J in the Swing library. All right, so down here I have what's called a text field. Okay, so you guys, how many of you guys have ever seen a text field in a program that you've used? Okay, how many of you guys just aren't listening to me at all? Because your hand should be up now. Because everyone has seen a text field in a program, right? Any program you like, think of it, Gmail, text field. What would a text field be? Probably the subject, right? So a text field is usually it's a single line text box, okay? It just goes one line. It doesn't allow you to go into the next line. It's one line, okay? So again, JTextField is the particular class we're going to use for that, okay? Text area. How many of you guys have ever seen a text area? Yeah. What would the text area be, let's say, and again, for like Gmail? Yeah, the actual body, maybe even like the to field or the CC, the blind carbon copy. It's basically something that I can have multiple lines of text in, okay? So JTextField. Right? There's such a thing as a JPasswordField. Okay, so this does the work for you automatically, and that, hey, I type in something, it automatically obscures my text. Right? So if I type in my super secret password, which is password 123, of course, you won't be able to see my super secret password. You'll just see ... Right? I think I said the right characters, right number. Okay. So as you're typing it, it basically blocks those characters. So that's a nice thing to have, right? It does all the hard work for you in that. Okay. We've used this one, right? The button. So the JButton comes up. We can give it text. We can even put icons in there if we want to put like nice little pretty pictures to help the users know what this button's really doing. So that's the JButton. It's clickable, right? So I can click it down and then release it, and you'll actually see that button go down and then up. How many of you guys have ever seen a button in a program? Keep your hands raised. Kevin. Thank you. All right. So what's a button? This is the dumbest question ever, right? In Gmail. Send, right? Dom's really seen a button. He's got his hand up still. Okay. So, all right, what about this? All right, so these ones you've seen, but you've maybe not known the official name for them. So see these little, how many of you guys have ever seen these things right here? These are what's called radio buttons, okay? So these basically allows you, what's the property of this, of these radio buttons? What's kind of the catch with them? You can only pick one, right? So if I'm here, I'm selecting on the pig. If I then go and click on this little cat circle, my dot's now going to be in the cat. It's going to leave the pig. Okay, so these are all kind of tied together as one. All right, and then down here I have what's called checkboxes. Okay, so JCheckBox is the class that I use for these, and these are basically either checked or not checked. Okay, unlike the radio buttons, these can be multiple ones can be checked at the same time. Okay, so they're more kind of independent, although they're usually related. Right, they're usually related, but they're also independent. Each one can be true or false. Okay, JList. Okay, so this would be something like you see over here on the right side. So JList is the class name. Here I can basically add some kind of strings. Okay, but I can actually throw at it a list of objects and then tell it, hey, how do I want to, for the sake of displaying this, how do I want to display this string? Okay, so for instance, we've been, what was the last class we created? Employee, maybe, right? So we've created an employee list. So I could actually do something like this. I could say, hey, let me bind this list of employees to this list, this JList. And I would basically tell it, hey, when you're printing these employees, what I want you to do is just print their first and last name. Okay, so we can program it in that way, but it's still connected to an actual object underneath the surface. Okay, this is a JList. These are really useful. You'll see these all the time. Down here I have a drop-down list. Okay, so this would be something like maybe what's the most common thing you can think of where you see drop-down lists? Let's say like in e-commerce. Country, right? So let's say I'm going through the checkout and I'm buying my stuff. You always see something like this, right? It says select the country, right? And what's the idea? Why do we use drop-down lists? What's the point of that?
Be specific and not have to worry about value input.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I give them all the options that are valid, right? And I also don't worry about them misspelling. Maybe someone doesn't know how to spell their country, right? I mean, it happens. Or we just type the wrong key in, right? Or maybe I have my own name for my country, and no one else really knows it, and I don't even think. I just put it down there. So that's the idea is, hey, I'm going to give you your choices such that you're going to have to give me at least a valid choice. And so you pick from the drop. And then usually, right, we pick the United States, and then it will drop down with all the states in America, right? I even saw a crazy one. I bought something earlier in the week, and basically it then went, once I selected California, it gave me another drop down of all the cities in California, which I thought was a little ridiculous. But they're really nice these days, right? Because I can usually, in like the newer drop down lists, I can actually type in them as well, right? And it'll actually kind of auto-complete it for me. So that's a drop down list. So what does this look like in real programs? Okay, so this is a real program that I've created. So here is a JTextField, right? It's just one line. Here's a JLabel, right? It's just some static text, although it can be changed when I'm running my program. But it more or less is usually static text. I set this up here, search results, and this is just always going to be there when your program's up. Okay, here's a JList over on the right side. So you can see the names, Jim Williams, Joe Williams. So this is actually bound to a Guardian class, and I'm just telling you, hey, print out the first and last name. Same thing down here. Here's a JList of children. It's bound to the children class. Here's some buttons, right? So you can see I have text on the buttons, but I also have little small icons to kind of give the user a little bit more feedback. So I don't even want to read the text usually, right? I can look at these icons, right? Say, hey, new. I can see the little pencil means edit. Present, right? I'm raising my hand. So it kind of gives you an idea of what the buttons are going to do without even having to look, right? The search, we have a little icon. So I would highly recommend doing this. You don't want to go overboard with it, and you want to keep it classy, right? Okay? Don't put dumb buttons on there. Don't put like ridiculous icons, or no one's going to run your program. It's going to be like that red and blue GUI that we made the other day. All right? So keep this in mind. You can add images and icons that can really enhance your program, but if you're not careful, you can really make your program look kind of JV, right? You can make it look kind of JV status, right? We're varsity. We're 225. You don't want to look like a 220 student, right? So I found this guy, and I just thought he was awesome. So he says, for totally rad info and examples of all these components and more, visit docs.oracle.com/Java. Because this is what he's thinking about, right? All right, but seriously, this is a great resource. If you go and click on this link, you're going to find all the components. I'll go and do it right now. All right, so if I click on this link, can I even click on it? I'll copy and paste it. Oh, no. All right, so this web page takes me right here, okay? This is really cool. Look, how to use fill in the blank, right? How to use combo boxes. If I want to know how to use combo boxes, I click, and you can see they have really nice images in there for us. Basically, they'll even have some code in there to kind of give you a clue how to handle the events that come up. We'll talk about events in a second. Let's say how to do buttons, how to use buttons, checkboxes, radio boxes. So we come in here, it'll show us kind of, here's some buttons. It'll actually give us some example code in there. Here, buttondemo.java. So you can download this, right? So here's code to kind of give you, and this is, I highly recommend going to this web page, right? we just simply don't have time to go into all these components, and it just wouldn't really be a great use of time. So we want to learn the fundamentals, use a few of these, and hopefully that will give you comfortable enough to actually start to look at some of this code and say, oh, how do I use a button? Oh yeah, I just kind of massaged it a little bit, given what code is already up here. Okay, lots of great resources online. I would highly recommend though that this is the official ones, right? We have all kinds of stuff in here. Here's all the different components that you could possibly choose from. Okay. All right. So just take a minute to reflect on the seriousness of this comment by this gentleman. All right. So we've already done a little of this stuff. We've gone through this set layout, add. We didn't do the RemoveAll, but you can kind of guess what that does, right? If I added a bunch of stuff to my container, I can call RemoveAll in the container, and that will basically remove everything from that container. Okay. Did we talk about the flow layout?
You talked about it.
Yeah, we talked about it, and I just kind of used it, right? So again, the flow layout, what it does, I don't know if I have a picture. The flow layout, essentially what it does is it's just remember how I said the container has a layout manager. And this basically tells me when I add buttons and lists to my container, how are they going to be all situated? Okay? So essentially the flow layout just says, hey, just put them one after the other. Right? So we have the GUI. Maybe I'll run it in a second. But it just puts them one after the other. And if you remember, if we smashed our GUI and made it skinnier, it would actually take those components that would basically spill off the edge, and it would move them below. Okay? So it would kind of do some automatic control for us, which is pretty neat. Okay. So a few component methods. So again, this is kind of the structure of the component library. Okay. So you're not going to have to memorize this, but just take a second and kind of take it in. So I have an object. Everything inherits from the object class, right? It's what we learned from the inheritance chapter. Then I have a component, okay, so component is next, and then a container. So you can see, remember we said a container is a component. And then I have the J component. Okay, so this, when we start seeing J, what does that mean?
Swing.
Yeah, when I start seeing J, that means I'm working with the swing class, okay? So you can see, hey, the J component, the swing version of component, inherits from really the normal version of component. So it's almost like a supercharged kind of better component. All right, and then we can see that a bunch of other stuff inherits from JComponent, right? So I can see I have JLabel, JTextComponent, which you haven't really heard of yet, but it's there, right? JList, JComboBox. Then I have something called AbstractButton, right? So this is, as you can imagine, it's an abstract button. I can't actually instantiate this because it's probably abstract given its name, even though I've never heard of it before. And then I have JButton and JToggleButton, right? So these are different types of buttons. Underneath those, I have JRadioButton, JCheckBox. Underneath my JTextComponent, I have JTextField, JPasswordField. Because you can imagine this, right? A JPasswordField is really just a JTextBox, right? It's a JField, it's just a normal text box. But it has a little extra jazz in it, right? It has that whole blocking the characters that we're writing. So this, again, just to give you an idea of the structure, everything inherits from JComponent, and all that stuff, inherits from object and so on and so forth. Okay? So container is not a J. Okay, container is actually above the level of swing, so there's no J container. Okay, so all the methods that I'm about to show you, and we've kind of dove into them just a tiny bit. They all are components. Okay, because remember all this stuff based on saying it's all components. They're really all J components in this case. So all these following methods are from the component class or the JComponent class. Okay, so it doesn't matter if I'm working with a JTextField, a JList, whatever it is. They're all going to have methods like these. Okay, so set visible, set tooltip text. Okay, what is this? What does the set visible do? It makes sure that it actually displays, right? So if I don't do set visible true, then I'm actually not going to display. Okay. What does a set tooltip text do? Yeah, if I hover over something, it's going to pop up this little tip. That's called a tooltip. Okay. Set foreground and set background. So what's the difference? Background is the background color. Foreground is the text. It usually refers to the text color. All right. So we had this one set opaque. It didn't work when I was trying it for some reason, but then I tried it like right after we ended the lecture. It worked just fine. So don't give up. First you don't succeed in programming, try again. Sometimes that's the way code works, right? You try it once, doesn't work. You try something else, you try the exact same thing again. Magic, it works, right? Don't ask yourself why. Just accept the blessing that it's working, right? All right. Set enabled. Anyone know what this does? It enables it so that what?
You can click it.
I can click it. Okay. If basically I can interact with it. All right. If it's set enable false, then it kind of grays out for me, and I can't click. If it's a button, I can't click it. If it's a text field, I can't click it to get my cursor going on in there. Okay. All right. So when I use a component, I must instantiate it. All right. So I need to say, for instance, JButton B1 equals new JButton. Okay. JList J1 equals new JList. Okay, something like that. So just make sure that you instantiate it, or else you're going to get this null pointer exception, like we do with any class that we try to use without actually calling the new operator on. Okay. And also make sure we do the set visible. That's the last thing in our constructor usually. Okay. So any questions up until this point? Okay. All right, so there's one last major component. So if you remember when we were creating our GUI the other day, the first we had in our constructor we had two methods that we created. What were those two methods? What was the first one? Remember what the first method we created? Yeah, so initialize components, or init components for short. And that, what happened in there? So it created the container, it created the buttons and the labels and all this stuff, right? So it was actually creating, it was making all the calls to new, set visible, set the size and stuff like that. So basically anything you can think of that involves the way that this GUI is going to look when it actually opens, where the buttons are going to be, how big the buttons, how big the components, that should be done in init components, okay? What was the second method that we had? Create events, yeah. So as you can imagine, inside the create events method, we are going to create events, okay? So you may be saying, what is an event? Okay, well, think of this security guard right here, okay? So he says, hey, I'm working hard, right? But hardly anything ever happens at my job. It's pretty safe. So I'll wake up and respond when something happens, okay? But otherwise, I'm not like an active security guard. I'm just going to walk around. I'll wake up when something happens, okay? So this is actually a fairly good way to think about what happens in our GUI, okay? So our GUI program uses what's called an event-driven model, all right? So what happens is essentially, I'm going to write a method that responds to an event, just like the security guard, right? He's only going to work when he hears a loud crash that wakes him up. So maybe an alarm gets triggered and the lights start flashing, right? And that event causes him to wake up. And what's he going to do in response? He's going to have some protocol that he follows, right? So, hey, check the alarm, check the security cameras. If you see someone with a gun, then get out your weapon or call the police, He's going to do something like that. He's going to respond to this event, okay? And now for a short story, okay? So this is kind of how it works in our program, right? So our program might display some text fields, a few buttons, and a selectable list of items, right? So all the components that make up our GUI, okay? So then what's going to happen is our program is basically going to sit back and it's going to wait for the user to do something, okay? So when I click play on my GUI, it just shows up, right? Does it disappear? It doesn't disappear, right? So this is kind of different from our code up until this point. If we had a console, for instance, right? And if we were actually to run this program through Windows, which we don't usually do, or even Mac, right? If we actually ran the program as we run normal programs, it would show up for an instant. It would just write all the output that you have output into your console, and then it would just disappear, right? It's actually would just disappear. Okay. The GUI is different, right? It shows up and it waits, right? It waits for you, the user, to interact with it. Okay. So when the user enters text, for instance, into a text field and maybe presses a button, so clicks on a button or selects an item from the list, our program will respond by performing the function that the user has requested. Okay. Then the program will sit back and wait for the user to do something else. Okay. So I open up my GUI. It's just there. It shows me all the buttons, all the text fields, and all that stuff. You know, I start typing in some text, and I click a button. When I click that button, it's probably going to process something, right? If it's my Gmail, and I click the send button, it's going to have some code that's basically sending that out over the internet to whoever you're sending it, right? If I have a button that says, you know, check-in child to my kid's check-in app that I showed earlier, it's going to basically take that child and change it to show that that kid is checked in now, right? It's going to kind of move him around and do some stuff, okay? As soon as it's done processing, my program sits back and waits again, okay? It waits for the next event. So events usually happen, I mean, there's basically two ways that events going to happen. One, it's usually if I'm moving my mouse. I'm either moving it or I'm clicking on something. Or maybe my keyboard. I hit a button on my keyboard, maybe to enter a space, which causes the button to be activated, or so on and so forth, something like that. Okay. So essentially, think of it like this, right? So when my user interfaces with the GUI component by maybe pressing down the big red button, right? This fires an event. Okay. So in my program, I basically need to create what's called listeners. Okay. So this is almost like the security guard, right? He's not doing anything. He's sitting in a chair, but he's listening. Okay, he's kind of listening for an event. Maybe he's listening with his eyes and his ears, so to speak, right? But he's listening. So what we need to do, we need to write what's called an event handler class called a listener. Okay, so this basically just sits there and waits for an event. Okay, so this is kind of a nasty little process, and once we get into our GUI designer, it's going to do all this for you. But it's really helpful to understand the basic idea, right? So write an event handler class, instantiate an object of that listener, and register that listener on one or more components. Okay. So basically, all I really want you to take from this is that we're going to create this listener, and this listener is going to be associated with one of our buttons, for example. Okay. So when I click on button 1, I have this listener that's going to take this very specific action. It's going to call this very specific code. Okay. All right, and we can have more than one listeners. All right, I can have a listener on my button 1. I can have a listener on my button 2. I can have a listener on, you know, my text field if you start typing something in immediately. How many of you guys have ever seen, like, for instance, the password ones where literally as you're typing, it's evaluating, hey, not strong enough, too strong. Yeah. So think about it, right? I'm basically, my listener there is every time you type something in. It's not, you know, it's not when you're done and then you press the check button. That's maybe kind of old school way of doing it, right? But the newer kind of more modern, you know, websites that you go to, they're going to actually, while you're typing it, they'll have that little, you know, check mark or X to the side that says, hey, still not good enough, still not good enough. So every time you type it in, saying, hey, based on what they've given me so far, is it meet the requirements? Okay. Here's the event object. Okay, it gets a little messy, right? Because there's a lot of different, just like there's a lot of different types of components, right? We got buttons, lists, text fields, text areas, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of different types of events. Okay, it gets, like I said, it gets a little messy. You can see action event, item event, component event, mouse event. You can kind of guess what some of these are. So again, I just want you to know that there are a whole bunch of them. Okay, we'll write one by code, and then the rest will pretty much let our designer kind of take care of for us. Right? I'm actually going to do it a little bit different way. But here, you know, just to kind of hammer this point in. So here's my JTextField. It's when I press enter, okay, on the text field, this will fire what's called an action event. Okay. To respond to this action event, I need an action listener. Okay. So think of it this way, right? My security guard, when someone breaks a window, that's like a sound event, right? to hear that, I need ears, right? I need ears that are listening. Maybe it's another, maybe it's a visual event that happens, right? There's a light flashing. Well, that's a light event. I need eyes. I need eyes to be listening, so to speak, or looking, okay? So basically, there's different types of listeners to respond to different types of events that happen, okay? JRadioButton, so JRadioButton and JCheckBox, when I select one of the different buttons or boxes, it fires what's called an item event, okay? To handle that, I need to create what's called an item listener, okay? It's just the connection that they use, okay? JList, there's what's called a J selection event when I select an item. So think about my JList. It has a bunch of different items I can select from. Whenever I click on one of those, it fires this list selection event. So I need a list selection listener, okay? And these listeners will basically give me information like, hey, which item did they actually click on? Right? Here's a list of 10 items. Which one of those did they actually click on? Any component has what's called the mouse event, okay? And I catch that by using the mouse listener, okay? Moving or dragging the mouse, pressing or releasing. So these are kind of generic to all components, whereas some of these are maybe specific to certain components, okay? All right, so this would be, okay, so this is kind of some nasty code. This is going to be probably something, if you were actually writing this, you would copy and paste it over and over again. You would just change it, right? Because it's kind of hard to remember. I'm not even sure I've remembered it yet, to be honest. But we want to understand the main concepts here, okay? So this is an example for an action listener, okay? So here I have component name. This is basically whatever my actual instantiation of a component. So maybe I had button B1 defined somewhere. I would say b1.add action listener, okay? And then I say new action listener, because if you remember, that's what the button was based on, the action listener, okay? And then notice that I just go straight into my brackets, okay? I don't close this with another. So this is actually a method. This is really weird, but this is basically like a method defined inside of a parameter, okay? I'm actually saying this is the action listener, and this is what it does. This is the code for it, okay? It's really weird. Don't think about it too much, but just kind of take it for granted in some sense. I mean, understand it, but I'm basically defining what this particular listener does, okay? Inside of this listener, I'm also defining the action to be performed when I hear an event from this action listener, okay? And you can see here I'm passing in my action event. So this just gets tossed to you by the Java system, okay? It's all the component does all the really dirty work for us. We just get this event. Who knows where it comes from, so to speak. It's coming from the JComponent, but we don't have to worry about it. It just kind of comes when we click on something, all right? So then, basically, at this point, this is where I write my code to say what happens. Yeah?
Is it possible to kind of group all of the components into like a larger kind of view or something, and then make a switch statement for each? And in case this happens, this action happens?
Yeah. Yeah, you can do it multiple ways. So the way that we're going to do it, the way that basically the designer is going to do it, is it's going to create one of these blocks for every action you want to do. So it's based on this button or this list or that list. You can create a gigantic one, and that's what this is getting at, okay? So get source. Basically, you're going to get this object passed in kind of like this. You're just going to get some random feeling object, and I can call get source, okay? So I say, hey, some event happened. Who triggered this event? And that's why I have this guy saying, who said that, right? Who triggered this event? And that's going to basically say, hey, button 1 or button 2, or hey, this list triggered this event. And then I can have this huge method that you could do it either way. I don't know that there's really a best practice. I know that the designer does it the way that I'm kind of showing you right now, but the book does it like you're saying. It actually has kind of a bigger one that says, hey, if the source was button 1, then do this. If the source is button 2. I kind of like having them more compartmentalized.
That's how Android kind of does it both ways.
Yeah.
They do it like the get source kind of thing.
Right.
Just make all the stuff and have a case statement for each.
Yeah, and you'll see both of them, to be honest. You'll see both. So it's good to kind of at least be exposed. Okay. All right, so action perform. All right, so let's go ahead and just try this. Okay, so remember, I have my ActionListener dot add. Okay, and then inside that I'm creating ActionListener. Okay, and then inside of that I have public void action performed and then action event. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can get this. We may need to come back to our little cheat sheet here, so to speak. But let's see. All right. So here we are. This is kind of where we are so far. Okay. So I'm going to play this, and we have our awesome GUI that we would get fired for if we actually created it. Okay. So we have our buttons. See, we can click it, and then button 2 is not enabled. Okay. So button 2 is not enabled. That's why I can't click it. Button 2 also I set. See, this is what I was saying. I actually did get this to work. I set opaque to false. Okay. So that's why you can basically see through it in this case. All right. One thing I do want to do before I go any further is talk a little bit about convention. Okay. Whenever we're creating these components, it really helps to give them a prefix. Okay. So here I'm labeling it B1 and B2. What I really want to do is usually you give it a 3-letter prefix that kind of tells me what type of component this is. Okay. So I'm actually going to change this to BTN1. Okay. And I'm just going to basically hit Control F on that, and I'm going to say B1 BTN1. Okay, and this is going to basically find and replace all the instances that I had. So I say replace all, and you can see it'll go and actually do all the changes I need to have my little cheat sheet at the bottom there. Okay, so again, I'm going to do this here. So just double click if you want to, and then Control F. I want to say find B2, replace it with BT button 2. Okay, now button 1 and button 2, BTN1 and BTN2 are actually pretty terrible names as well, okay? Because what is button 1 and button 2? Unless there's literally the number 1 and the number 2 on my button, and it's maybe like a calculator, these are terrible names because it tells me that it's a button, which is really nice, so we're getting a little bit better. But it doesn't tell me what the button does, right? So usually, let's go back to our email, I would probably have button send, BTN send, right? BTN reply all or something like that, right? BTN check-in, BTN apply, BTN submit, okay? Whatever that button, usually it's the text that's on that button, you want to be kind of the end name for it, okay? So let's go ahead, and maybe I'll even do that just to make sure we understand. So I'll say button apply, and then I'll come down here and I'll just change my text to say apply, okay? Then I'll say, all right, button submit or something like that. And I'll come down and change my button 2 to submit. Okay? All kinds of errors. Oh, I didn't. Forgot to change all of them. Okay, so, and then right here, I said button 2 for this, okay? All right, so replace all, so now we should get rid of our error. So now when I play it, it's a lot more, it makes sense. The code behind it makes sense with the GUI that I'm seeing, right? So button apply, button, and this will really help you out if you do this, okay? Because you're gonna get GUIs that have maybe dozens of components in them, okay? And I'm just writing code, I wanna say, hey, what was that button? Well, I remember that button, I don't remember what it was called, but I know it's a submit button, so literally what you can do is you can say this dot, and it's going to bring up all your options, usually, right, if we make these instance variables, which we will do. And I say dot, and it's going to give, and then I just start typing in BTN, and it's going to show me all my buttons. Okay, and that way it's really easy. This is just kind of based on practice what I found. It's a lot easier to write code that way. So follow the conventions, it will help you. Okay. All right, so finally, here we are. We've got these 2 buttons, okay? So now what I want to do is I want to go down to my create events, and I want to create my action handler. Okay. So remember, and this is I want to show you this. The reason why I made this instance variable. Let's say that I had just created this right here. Okay. So JButton, it works fine, right? My button's up there. It's clickable. It's apply, right? However, now I'm down in my create events, and I need to add an action handler. Okay. So usually, what's going to happen is you're going to find I'm going to need to access my components all throughout my code. Okay. So because of that, I need to make them an instance variable, right? Because now I want to say, hey, let me add an action handler down here. So I say, hey, button apply dot. Oh, shoot, where is it? Right, so then I say, maybe I got the name wrong. So let me just try my this trick, right? So I say this dot. Cool, it gives me all my stuff. I'm just going to say button. And you can see right there, hey, I only have button submit. That's exposed. Okay. So what I need to do is come back up and basically remove the definition here, make it an instance variable. Okay. That way I can access my button anywhere in my code. And you're almost always going to, there's some stuff that you just created and you're never going to touch it again. So you can make it local. Any ideas of what components might fall into that category that we've seen so far? Think of something. What's never going to change in like your Gmail page?
Send button.
Send button. But the send button, I need it later because I need to know what action takes place.
Page title or something?
Yeah, maybe like the title. Even the title. Well, the title's not really a component. It's more of a setting of a component. But think about like the labels, right? Send, colon, right? I have something like that. Or I have like subject, colon, right? Right before the subject text box. That's never going to change, ever, right? So that's the type of thing that I can maybe get away with creating inside of my init components and then not needing it anywhere else. But almost all buttons, almost all controls I'm going to interact with, you need to make instance variables. Okay. So now I can come back down here and I can say this dot and start and see the nice thing is now I just say, hey, I know it's a button. I don't even remember what I called it, but if I just type in btn, I'm going to get all my buttons. And this will really help you when you're programming. Okay, so I'm going to say button.apply, and then here's all my options. I just start typing in add, and you can see add action listener. For me, it comes up because I think I've already used it once. Okay, so I add an action listener, and this is nice. Or I can just hover over and see, hey, what's it expecting? Oh, it's expecting an action listener. All right, so let me create a new action listener in there. Okay, so I'm going to say new action listener. Okay. Can't spell. Yeah, it is easy. Why is it not working? Okay, it's probably not working because it's not complete. Okay. So let's say new action listener, and normally I would do something like this. Okay. So cannot instantiate. Okay. So, well, I think we just need to finish it. Okay, so before I close this, I'm hoping it lets me import it, but let's just go ahead and finish it and see if we can get rid of the error that way. Before I close this, I actually need to go to a new line, okay? Because I'm going to create, if you remember, I'm going to create almost like a method inside of this, okay? So I can get rid of the this if we want. Create a method inside this, and what it's going to do, look down here, I now need to define my action. What? Yeah, my action performed, okay? So I say public void action performed, okay? And what do I pass into that? An action event, okay? So action event, just call it AE for instance. And then inside of here, okay, so you can see that our error went away. Right? So it was basically just waiting for me to kind of finish this all up. Okay. So I have my button apply, I have add action listener, new action, open close parenthesis, and then it's like I have some brackets that I put, and then I define this action performed, pass in an action event, And now now this is where I can write my code. Okay. So what I might want to do is simply say something like this. I'm going to say, hey, if they click on this button, then what I want to do is say JOptionPane dot show message dialog. Okay, so null, and then congrats, your first click. Okay. All right. So now what happens is, so when I run my code, so let me set a breakpoint here. Okay. So I'm going to run my code. That didn't work. All right. So I'm going to basically step down into this. All right. So I'm going to hit F5. It's going to jump into my first GUI constructor, right, which is going to jump next into init component. So I'm going to go through all this stuff. It's just setting all this stuff, okay? Set visible, okay? So I run that line of code, and you can see as soon as I call set visible, this thing shows up, okay? And it's kind of there, right? So this actually is kind of in its own thread, right? This GUI is running. But now let me go back to my code, okay? So if I run down into create events, you're going to see it's going to run through this create events code. All the while, my GUI is still going. Okay, I can interact with it and everything. So this is very different before, right? Because I'm running through code, I'm still interacting with my program at the same time. So it's going to kind of create, even though it kind of just hovered over it, it actually created that event. And now I hit F8, and it's now we're at the stage where I hit F8 to say, hey, go just run the rest of the code. And you can see it's not paused anywhere in here, but my program's running, okay? So now, let me set up a breakpoint in here. So I'll set up a breakpoint right on this show message, okay? So now what happens is I click this, I can unclick it, nothing happens, right? If I click and then I drag off and then, you hear that? Click, drag off, unclick, then that wasn't a real click, okay? But if I click it and let go, you can see now basically this action is being caught by my button listener. Okay, so now it's basically going to give me this pop-up, which says congrats, your first click. Okay, so congrats.
He used to keep doing that, right?
Yes, but I'm going to turn off my breakpoint. So now every time I click this, well, now it's not my first, right? So now it's a liar. My program is a liar. But you made me make it a liar. All right, so now I'm going to come down. I'm going to say, all right, JOptionPane, let's do this for this other guy, right? So once you got it once, you can more or less copy and paste as long as the listeners and this stuff is the same. So now I'm going to say button submit, okay? So we'll just put on here submit. Okay. Okay, so the last thing I need to do is come up here because my submit button is not enabled, right? So let me uncomment that out. Oh, you know what I can do? This is going to be cool. You guys are going to be amazed by this. All right, watch this. When I click apply, what I can do is I can say button submit dot enabled dot set enabled true. Okay. So then I say unleashed. The submit button is unleashed, right? All right. So so now let me go ahead and play this. Okay. So you can see my submit button is locked up. Can't do anything about it. When I press apply, I get this message box, and then look, my submit button is now enabled, okay? So I can click submit, and then my submit is unleashed. That deserves another hand clap. Okay? All right, a little tip. Let's say that, now that we're really working with GUIs, we never want to display anything to the console anymore, okay? Never, ever, ever, because the user is not going to see it. The user doesn't have a console. They just see whatever I can display either through my GUI or through the J option pane. A little functionality you may not have knew existed was if I do J option pane, if I say show message dialog, you can see there's actually 3 different options for show message dialog. Okay, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use one of these other ones. Okay, so I'm going to use parent component. We're going to keep that null. Okay, my message is going to say the same, right? So unleashed. But maybe I want this to be like an error message. Okay, so I'm actually going to give it a title. Maybe put something in there, right? Just so you know that I really wrote this and it's not like Java. And then I give it this message type. Okay, so what is this? This is actually a static number that I get from the J option pane itself. Okay, so I can say J option pane dot, and it gives me these kind of static options. Okay, I can actually come down and find error message. Okay, and you can play with this and see if you can get the change. But I'll play this one more time for you. All right, so this is locked up right now. I press apply. It's now unlocked. I press submit, and now you can see I get this nice error message. Okay, so it gives me an error icon. I change the title. So it's just a little bit cleaner way, and you can do this right for warnings. I think there's one for warning. So I have dot warning message, right? So now if I change it, submit, I'll get kind of like a warning option. Okay? All right, so remember the main thing here is the action listener. Don't get too stressed out if you can't remember this. I won't make you remember. I'll make you remember kind of the general idea here. But after we kind of make it, so tomorrow in lab, we will have a quiz based on file input and output. Okay? Yeah. And then after that, we're going to do a lab, and you'll basically be making a simple GUI using just code. Okay? We'll do it once, and then we'll never do it again. We'll use a designer after this.